As with any long-running video game series, with an increase in budget, we eventually see many of them increase in scope. This meant better visuals, incredible soundtracks, and deeper narratives. The Final Fantasy series was no exception. By the time the 13th installment of Final Fantasy was released, we see the better hardware of the time to showcase some of the best visuals and some of the deepest lore in the series that we've seen so far. This also rang true when Final Fantasy XV was finally released as well, showcasing not only incredible visuals and music, but also an open world that players can explore. And although Final Fantasy XIII and Final Fantasy XV are two of the recent titles to the mainline Final Fantasy series, we can still see direct influences to the two games in Final Fantasy XIV. And so today, we'll be looking at the references to Final Fantasy XIII and Final Fantasy XV in Final Fantasy XIV, starting with Final Fantasy XIII. As always, these videos will have spoilers for the games being discussed in this video, so consider this your spoiler warning. Final Fantasy XIII was first released in Japan in December 2009 for the PS3 and Xbox 360. This game was the first in the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy, with Final Fantasy XIII-2 released in December 2011 and Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII released in 2013. Now before we talk about the main crossover event, let's talk about some of the miscellaneous references within Final Fantasy XIV. The Arcanist spell Ruin comes from the commando spell Ruin from Final Fantasy XIII. The spell in Final Fantasy XIV serves as a basic attack for the Arcanist class. In 13, the spell serves as a ranged magic attack within the commando paradigm. The main character of Final Fantasy XIII, Lightning, uses a modernized version of the Gunblade. Her Gunblade made its way to Final Fantasy XIV alongside her outfit and hairstyle when the Final Fantasy XIII event first came out. But we see another reference to Lightning with the female idol pose for Gunbreakers, standing very much like Lightning's battle stance in Final Fantasy XIII. Now let's go over some of the enemy models that came from Final Fantasy XIII. The first is the Pulse Soldiers and Dreadnaughts. Both of these were first seen in Final Fantasy XIV in the Binding Coils of Bahamut raids. The soldiers in 14 can open up very much like how they open up when staggered in 13. The Pulse Dreadnought can also be seen as a minion obtained through PvP. In the twinning, we see many other enemy models from Final Fantasy XIII, such as Flans, Anubis, which is an enemy found in Lightning Returns, Behemoths, and specifically the Alpha Zegnal, which is a reference to an enemy in Final Fantasy XIII-2, and the second boss, which uses the Flying Seath model. And in the dungeon The Dead Ends, in the second part of the dungeon, we see two of the Psycom enemy models here. And the Ochu, which is a mission enemy in Final Fantasy XIII, can be found as an overworld mob in Kaluja. Now let's get to the Final Fantasy XIII crossover event. In November 2013, Final Fantasy XIV hosted an event known as Lightning Strikes. This event was rerun again in February 2014 and one last time in September of the same year. This event served as promotional content for the upcoming Lightning Returns game at the time. The event featured Lightning mysteriously appearing in the world of Eorzea. During the event, Lightning accompanies the Warrior of Light as they battle around Eorzea, trying to figure out the reason for Lightning appearing in this world. Three notable Fate bosses that came from Final Fantasy XIII include the Armored Beast, which is another Final Fantasy XIII Behemoth model, the Dreadnought, which we've talked about before, and the Aspect of Chaos, which uses a model of Bahamut from Final Fantasy XIII. The Anubis enemies from Lightning Returns also appears during a certain fate. The Final Fantasy XIII version of Odin also appears alongside Lightning in the final fate of the event. The music featured during the first 3 fates was Blinded by Light, and Saber's Edge plays during the last fate. Lightning and Snow's outfit and hairstyle were available as rewards during the event. There were also many weapon models from Final Fantasy XIII that were awarded in the event, including Lightning's Blazefire Saber, Snow's Ice Axe, which is a weapon that Snow uses in Lightning Returns, Sarah's Starseeker and Mog's Staff, which were weapons from Final Fantasy XIII-2, the Vega Knuckles, which was modeled after Saz's Vega 42s, the Grimoire Wing, which was modeled after Hope's Boomerang, Vanille's Binding Rod, and Fang's Bladed Lance. The story of the event features Lightning mysteriously appearing in Eorzea. The last thing she remembers is going to sleep. Since this event was meant to promote Lightning Returns, the sleep mentioned here presumably was when she was crystallized at the end of Final Fantasy XIII-2. Lightning believes that she is being tested by some god in order to prepare her for the future. At the end of the event, she believes that the gods hear her challenge and bring her back to her world, presumably leading to the events of Lightning Returns. When she disappears, white feathers are left in her place, which can be seen as a reference to her Final Fantasy XIII-2 outfit, which featured white feathers. And now, let's move on to the Final Fantasy XV references. Final Fantasy XV was released for the PS4 and Xbox One in December 2016. Being the only mainline Final Fantasy that was released after Final Fantasy XIV, understandably, this has the least amount of references in Final Fantasy XIV. However, with Final Fantasy XIV getting regular updates and events, it's no surprise that Final Fantasy XIV got a crossover event with 15. In April 2019, the event A Nocturne for Heroes arrived in Final Fantasy XIV. This event was rerun again in 2021. The event follows Noctis, who mysteriously made his way to Eorzea. In this event, you get to follow Noctis as he tries to find his way back to his world. In the first cutscene, Noctis is seen with his car, the Regalia. As he talks to the Warrior of Light, there is a mention of Cid, in which Noctis mistakenly assumes that Cid from his world is also in Eorzea. Noctis then asks the Warrior of Light to help push his car, which is a subtle reference to the beginning of Final Fantasy XV, in which Noctis and his party are also broken down around a desert area and needs to push the car to Hammerhead. In the second cutscene, we see Noctis and the Warrior of Light make a campsite, which is a reference to when Noctis and his friends make camp. During this cutscene, depending on what you choose, Noctis will mention one of his friends, Gladio, Prompto, or Ignis, and how they would get along with the Warrior of Light. And on to the final part of the event, where Noctis and the Warrior of Light head towards the Ixal territory and meet what seems to be another version of Garuda. In this fight, the Warrior of Light is able to use Warp Strike, given by Noctis. Following the fight, Garuda acknowledges Noctis and the Warrior of Light's victory and helps Noctis travel back to his world. Cid arrives with a fully repaired Regalia and Noctis bids farewell to this world. Right before leaving, Noctis sees Luna Freya, the Oracle and the love interest of Final Fantasy XV. During this event, there are a number of rewards that can be obtained that are direct references to Final Fantasy XV, such as Noctis' outfit and hairstyle, several orchestrion roles such as Hammerhead, Valse di Fantastica, Relax and Reflect, Veiled in Black, APOCALYPSIS Noctis, and a quick pit stop. The title Kingsglaive is also available, which is a reference to the Kingsglaive, a special ops force for the Kingdom of Lucis, and also the title to the Final Fantasy XV movie. And finally, the Regalia is available as the first 4-seater mount in Final Fantasy XIV. The regalia even folds out during the flight, very much like the regalia in Final Fantasy XV. This whole event actually happens during a quest in Final Fantasy XV called An Adventurer from Another World, in which a Mikote named Yojime and her fat chocobo found its way to the world of Final Fantasy XV. This event has many references to Final Fantasy XIV, such as the aforementioned fat chocobo, the Ixal, and the main baddie, Final Fantasy XIV's version of Garuda. The fight with Garuda is very similar to the fight from Final Fantasy XIV, summoning wind plumes, Enchirada, and Suparna. After Garuda's defeat, Noctis is nowhere to be seen, only to reappear again behind the party. This is presumably when Noctis visits the land of Eorzea. Following the event, Noctis and his friends are awarded gear that is a reference to the racial gear found in Final Fantasy XIV. And finally, Noctis can purchase Vortex gear from Yojime with elegant tomestones. Now there is one more Final Fantasy XV reference that I want to mention, and although it could very much be a coincidence, when Venat challenges the Warrior of Light, she summons 3 different weapons that surround her. She is able to switch between these 3 weapons. This seems very similar to Noctis' Armiger, in which many different weapons surround him, and he is able to switch between these weapons. Final Fantasy XIII and Final Fantasy XV were vastly different games, not just to each other, but to the franchise as a whole. But this gave a unique perspective to each game, to which this was truly never before seen in the franchise. And although the games may be divisive within the fanbase, there is still a legacy that both games brought to the franchise, and without a doubt we'll be seeing their influence in future Final Fantasy games. Thank you guys for watching. A shout out again to my free company for helping me with some of this footage. And I will mention that this is not the end of the series, as I plan on making another video for the side games of the Final Fantasy series for Tactics, Type 0, and Crystal Chronicles. So I hope to see you in that video.